to my channel. This is the Theatre Library. My name is Amy and today Today I am going to be reviewing Mrs. Doubtfire the musical, which is currently on in the Opera House in Manchester, and telling you my thoughts on the show, what I liked, what I didn't like, what could maybe do with some improvements, who particularly in the cast was really good, all things like that. So I think for me personally this show has to be a 4-star show. The reason it is 4 and not 5 I will get into, but I do think there are some slight adjustments that they could make to the show. Now I am factoring in the fact that I saw the show on the 8th of September and I believe it opened on the 2nd, so it's not actually been open for very long, and I'm aware that I think that's still in preview week, isn't it? So they probably will change some of the bits, but there are just a few adjustments, but it definitely has so much potential to be a 5-star show. And even when it goes to London, I think it's confirmed to be going to London, but I don't know if there's a date yet, it will definitely be on 5-star contenders, and this is definitely a show that I think you should go and see. So I think my first point about this show was I went to it not really expecting much. I'm not really a fan of the film Mrs. Doubtfire, but I thought I would give the musical a go, because when I originally saw Back to the Future the musical, I had seen the film maybe once, because my dad's a fan of them, but I wasn't really a fan. I wasn't really that type of person. I saw the musical and became obsessed with the films, so I was like, maybe Mrs. Doubtfire will do the same. Maybe this will make me enjoy the film more, and it certainly has done. Maybe not to the extent that Back to the Future did, because that is one of my favourite shows, but it certainly has a place in my heart now. What I will say, for anyone who may be interested, this show definitely felt like it was more acting than music. I don't know if it was, or if it was like an equal split, but I have seen shows in the past such as Waitress where I've definitely sat in the audience and thought, oh god, this is a lot more acting than it is musical, compared to something maybe like Heathers. The music in itself is particularly good. I wasn't sure what to expect. The show had been on Broadway, but there's no cast recording, and so I hadn't heard anything, and I was sort of a bit curious to know what the songs were going to be like, and I am happy to come back and say that they are absolutely brilliant. One of my favourites in particular has to be a song that the kids sing, which I'm just going to check I have the programme. I'm just going to check that it's definitely called this, because I'm not too sure if it is. Yes, it is. The kids song called What the Hell. Particularly really nice, and it's a really nice moment for the kids to get to sing. I love it in a show when kids get an opportunity to have a full song, much like in Les Mis, the way the young Cosette has a castle on a cloud. I think it's really sweet when kids are in shows and they get moments just to shine. It's the reason why I love School of Rock, because the kids get to sing and play all the instruments themselves, which is, I mean, I could never do it at that age. For anyone who may be curious, because obviously, I'm assuming if you're into theatre you would know, that kids can't work like adults can in theatre shows, so they do have to have, I think they have 3, it might be 2 or 3 options of kids to switch between. The kids that we specifically saw when I went with my friend, we saw Charlie Tunbridge as Christopher, and we saw Angelica Pearl Scott as Natalie. If you're wondering where I'm looking at the kids' names in the programmes so that I don't get them wrong. Those kids in particular I want to give a massive hats off to, because they were incredible. I can't speak for the other children because I didn't see them, but they were brilliant. and their singing and their acting was incredible. Definitely some future little theatre stars in there, and I'm sure they're having the time of their life before they have to go back to school. Now, another point I will make is I was particularly curious about the quick changes, because if you know anything about Mrs. Doubtfire, if you've seen the film, you all know the character Daniel, who was our main character, creates Mrs. Doubtfire, who he becomes so that he can secretly become his kid's nanny and see his kids more. And he has to like put on prosthetics and a wig, and I was curious as to how that works in a show, because from briefly what I knew about the film, I knew there were some scenes where he was constantly changing in and out, and it was quite rushed, and I thought, how are they gonna do that on stage? I thought, are they just gonna do it on the actual stage and let us watch him do it, or are they gonna do it off stage and have him run on? Now, for the first scene where he very first becomes Mrs. Doubtfire, that happened off stage. If anyone has happened to see Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella that was on last year and earlier this year, up until about June or July I think it was, if you've seen that, the quick change in this is very similar to the quick change that they do in that, when they are going from bad Cinderella to ballroom, blonde wig, massive white ball gown dress Cinderella. It's very much, you see the back of him and there is a mask of some sorts covering the face, but most of the scene and the song takes place, and you will notice you only really see the back with a quick flash of that front face, which is how I know there was a mask. So I noticed what must have happened similarly to Cinderella is he would have rushed off stage and on would have come a body double, which is the effect of having the mask, so you can't actually tell that that's a different person sat in the chair. And so that first quick change happened all off stage, and any point onwards from that original first quick change, I believe is done on stage. I don't think there's any other offstage moments where he changes in and out of Mrs. Doubtfire. I think the rest of it is done on stage, because at that point we are aware and we know, and it was actually quite fun to see them at times be like, oh god, because the music would be going and they'd just be like trying to get the zip up on a back into his Daniel costume, which actually you could tell was, so his pants were sort of sewn to his shirt and the front was just a zip, so he would step out of Mrs. Doubtfire and just step into it like a jumpsuit and then just go and he'd be fully in his Daniel. But before that point I couldn't actually tell that that was just one big suit, so that's good on the costuming. The costuming and the wigs and everything in the show is beautiful, by the way. That is some great wardrobe. As for the general theatre experience, it was definitely very sort of electric, I would describe it. I don't know if it was due to the time in which I went, with it only being open for a couple of days, or if it's going to be like that the whole way through. If it is going to be like that the whole way through, go expecting the audience to cheer a lot, especially at certain scenes. It definitely felt like, I mean, we were at a matinee show, and there were definitely, from what we could see in the stalls anyway, there was a lot of an older audience. And I've been in shows before, not in shows, but I've been to shows before where there've been older audiences and it's sort of been a bit more quiet and a bit more reserved. This was definitely not that. Whether I just accidentally ended up going to a show where there are like a lot of Maniac fans, or if it's just going to be like that all the time. A lot of, obviously, there are certain iconic moments in the film that when they are done on stage warrant a cheer. The bows got such an amazing response in terms of claps and cheers and appraisal for everyone that was in it. Yeah, it was just a very good atmosphere. Top level sometimes I like that in a show where you go and there's cheering and there's sort of, you know, a reaction verbally from an audience throughout a show. And sometimes I've been to shows and they've been more quiet and I've thought I really would have loved to have clapped during that moment, but I'm too awkward to start that, so I'm not going to clap if no one else is clapping. But yeah, that audience was insane. Now for the reasons why this isn't a 5-star show for me, is not to do with any of the cast themselves, they were all incredible. It's more to do with a little bit of the writing, and particularly the end of Act 1, that scene, just felt really flat. Spoilers ahead, because I am going to have to tell you what happened to let you know why it fell flat for me. But Act 1 comes and ends with the kids discovering that Mrs. Doubtfire is actually their dad. I haven't seen the film in a very long time, so I don't know if it happens in the same way in the film, but in the musical, the dad is in the bathroom and Christopher comes down the stairs and opens the door and sees him sort of, I don't really know what he was attempting to do, if he was attempting to take his face off, but regardless, it ends with Christopher seeing that and Lydia coming down the stairs and seeing that as well, and then it ends, it just ends. Now, that fell flat for me in the musical in particular, because we'd sort of seen this progression of Daniel being denied a certain amount of custody over seeing his kids, and then becoming Mrs. Doubtfire so that he could see his kids more, and you're watching him interact with the kids and the kids not know and the mum not know, and particularly for me, you feel this sort of, it builds up a bit because you're like expecting, okay, well this is gonna, what's that on my neck? This is gonna come at some point where they're gonna figure out who he is, and they do, but it does fall flat because it's sort of done, the kids sort of go upstairs, go do your homework or whatever, and then like 30 seconds later it's ended. It sort of is very much like, it goes, here's all the tension, oh here's the kids figuring out, and it's not very like, I don't feel like you have enough time to actually settle with the fact of what's just happened on stage. I went to see the show with my friend and she agreed with me that the end of Act 1 sort of just felt flat, because it sort of felt like they built up all the tension but then they didn't release it in a way they maybe should have. I don't know if it's just maybe me and her, just felt like that, but yeah, I feel, and that is the reason why I've knocked it down. It may only be that one part in the show that I can particularly point out as something that would need work. However, for me anyway, moments like that, if you're going to end an act, it needs to be impactful, it needs to sort of make you want to come back. And when they did come back to Act 2, it sort of felt like they never even touched it again. Like they just said, oh here's the kids finding out, and then we come back in Act 2 after the interval and it's sort of a completely different scene, and it's never discussed what happened after that initial oh my god you're actually our dad scene, and it's sort of just like murky, and I'd prefer them to actually maybe give you a little bit more time, even if they just have silence and just have them staring at each other for like a few more seconds. That would feel somewhat more like, okay, you've got time to settle with it, or maybe open Act 2 with a little bit after that. I get why they've ended it the way they have, but for me it just needed that extra bit of time, or that extra little bit when we open Act 2 to come back to that before we go into the next scene maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's something that they're working on. I don't know if that's something that maybe other people agree with or they don't agree with. If you have seen the show, feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought of the end of Act 1, whether you thought the same thing as me or whether you disagreed with me and thought that actually that worked really well. Everyone has their own opinions and everyone is entitled to their own opinions. Now, to not end this video on a negative with me saying what I think could be improved about the show and being like, oh, here's what I didn't like, I thought I would give you a few names of actors in the show that I thought were particularly incredible. Gabrielle, I hope I'm saying that in the right way, Vic was incredible as Daniel Hillard / Mrs. Doubtfire. He takes on that role so incredibly. The way he conveys emotions and his facial expressions and the voice impressions that he does. If you know anything about Mrs. Doubtfire or have seen the musical so far, you will know that Daniel can do voice impressions of certain like characters from different films and stuff, and he does those incredibly well. Just extremely talented. Cameron Blakely is another actor that I want to give a quick shout out to. He is hilarious. I've seen him in The Addams Family earlier this year, and he was hilarious in that too. This is definitely a role that feels sort of fit for him. He gets to play this sort of funny and in a way outrageous character, but have a few little sweet moments, and any chance he gets to sing is incredible as well. Carla Dixon Hernandez, who plays Lydia Hillard, the eldest child, was particularly also a standout for me. She got to show very much a range of emotions. She had more times where, you know, she was angry at her parents for the divorce or for, you know, not wanting a nanny or whatever. And then she had more times where she was just emotional, and I can't remember the song off the top of my head, but I feel like there was definitely a moment where she had like a sweet song with her dad, which is lovely. And for someone who is still quite young, she's an adult but still quite young, it's nice to see the way she interacts with the other kids. The way she comes across is just so beautiful. I loved it. If you are living anywhere near Manchester, I live in Liverpool and travelled for it, or even if you want to travel from like London up to Manchester to see this show, I would so recommend it. I'm already making plans. I mean, I was sat during the interval going to my friend, I already want to come back and see this another time. Like, I know I'm going to book this again before it goes. So that might be me taking another trip to Manchester just to see it again before it goes. I may think there are a few little bits that need changing, however, overall this is definitely a really good show, sort of for all ages. I mean, particularly at our show we had an older audience, however I could definitely imagine this is something you could take your kids to. But yeah, 100% would recommend this. I think it is something that everyone should go and see, and I am excited for even when it comes to London to see how it does, because I think it's going to do really well. Don't forget to like, subscribe and comment what you would like to see from me next, whether it's theatre related or book related. Let me know. Bye!